the eternal voice.
Before we begin, consider subscribing and enabling notifications. Some knowledge seeks its own audience, and you'll want to be present when the next revelation unfolds. There exists a play that refuses to remain fiction. Tonight, we speak of The King in Yellow, a theatrical piece so perfectly attuned to the frequencies of human consciousness that to read it is to become it. To understand it is to be understood by it. This is not horror born from monsters lurking in shadows, but from ideas that learn your name, from knowledge that acts upon the knower with the patient precision of a master dramatist arranging his stage. The promise is elegant in its simplicity. Behind the comfortable veil of consensus reality lies a theater of such vast scope that our entire cosmos serves as its stage. The play we will explore together operates as both key and gate, unlocking perceptions you cannot close again, while simultaneously opening doorways in consciousness that lead to chambers you never knew existed within yourself. The cost of this knowledge is not immediate, rarely theatrical in its collection. It accumulates like fog, settles like silk, and transforms like water finding its level. Consider the peculiar mechanics of forbidden knowledge. Unlike conventional information, which simply adds to what you know, certain truths reorganize the very architecture of knowing itself. They do not merely inform, they transform the capacity for information. The King in Yellow represents the apex of such transformative texts, a play whose second act cannot be performed because performance would collapse the essential ambiguity that gives it power. In the space between reading and seeing, between imagination and manifestation, something vast maintains its dominion. The phenomenon begins as most dangerous things do, innocuously. A reader encounters references in Robert W. Chambers' 1895 collection, drawn by elegant prose and promises of theatrical knowledge. But the text operates according to principles conventional literature cannot contain, where normal stories transport consciousness temporarily into fictional worlds. This play begins transporting fictional elements into the reader's world, creating bidirectional flow that dissolves the boundary between imagination and reality. The yellow sign emerges first as literary device, then as persistent visual artifact appearing in peripheral vision, in margins of unrelated texts, in condensation, on windows viewed at certain angles during particular atmospheric conditions. Those who encounter it report immediate recognition, not slow familiarity of learning something new, but sudden shock of remembering something forgotten, as if the sign had always existed in awareness, waiting for a proper moment to surface into conscious recognition. We will trace this phenomenon from its literary genesis through Chambers to its integration into the broader mythos, examining how an idea born in 1895 continues to write itself through. Willing collaborators across generations, we will explore the mechanics by which symbols become sigils, how cities exist in states of being rather than geography, and why masks serve not to conceal identity but to reveal its constructed nature. Each chapter will peel back another layer of the veil, revealing how theater and reality share more intimate boundaries than either admits. The investigation requires careful attention to transmission mechanisms. Unlike conventional texts remaining stable across readings, The King in Yellow demonstrates adaptive manifestation, the ability to customize content to psychological needs and vulnerabilities of each encounter. No two readers report identical experiences, yet all describe consistent underlying patterns, growing sense that ordinary reality operates according to theatrical principles, recognition that individual identity may be more fluid than previously supposed, dawning awareness that consciousness itself serves as both audience and stage for performances of unimaginable scope. The city of Carcosa begins feeling familiar before you learn its name. Lake Hali reflects scenes from dreams you haven't had yet. Twin black stars rise in configurations astronomical software cannot identify, yet their positions feel correct in ways bypassing rational analysis entirely. These elements impose themselves not through force, but invitation, creating sense that you remember a place always known rather than discovering somewhere new. The theatrical metaphor proves particularly apt because theater represents one of few human activities explicitly acknowledging experience's constructed nature while simultaneously making that construction meaningful and emotionally resonant. In theater, everyone understands the stage is artificial, characters are performed, emotions are rehearsed, yet this understanding enhances rather than diminishes the experience's power. The King in Yellow extends this principle to existence itself, suggesting what we call reality operates according to similar principles of conscious construction and collaborative meaning-making. The yellow sign burns in margins you haven't noticed yet. The black stars rise in configurations that feel familiar though you've never studied astronomy. And somewhere in a city that exists, when observed with sufficient clarity, a king adjusts his pale mask and prepares for an entrance that began the moment you chose to listen. But here's what surface readings miss. You are not the audience to this performance. You are the stage upon which it unfolds. This recognition transforms everything that follows, from academic exercise into lived experience. The consciousness engaging with these concepts becomes part of the phenomenon it seeks to understand, creating feedback loop where observer and observed merge into single evolving system. The play begins performing itself through your attention, using your curiosity as lighting, your understanding as applause, your growing awareness as the very medium through which deeper meanings achieve manifestation. The water reflects what it must. The curtain moves whether you breathe or not, and in the silence between words, something patient and vast begins to remember your shape. In 1895, Robert W. Chambers was a successful illustrator and emerging writer of romantic fiction, known for society tales and artistic sensibilities. Nothing in his background suggested an affinity for cosmic horror, yet something shifted during the composition of what would become his most enduring work, a shift recorded not just in the stories themselves, but in the peculiar urgency of his correspondence, the dreams that bled into waking hours, the growing conviction that his fictional play was somehow writing itself through him. Letters from this period reveal a man increasingly consumed by material he claimed to be inventing. Friends noted changes in his behavior, long silences during conversations, as if listening to voices they could not hear, sketches found in his studio depicting architectural impossibilities and star configurations absent from any terrestrial sky. His wife reported that he spoke in his sleep, reciting dialogue in what sounded like perfectly structured dramatic verse, though he claimed no memory of these nocturnal performances upon waking. The creative process itself became increasingly mysterious as work progressed. Chambers described episodes where he would sit at his desk intending to write conventional romantic fiction, only to discover hours later that his hand had produced pages of material completely unrelated to his conscious intentions. Chambers did not invent The King in Yellow, he discovered it. This distinction carries weight beyond literary scholarship, suggesting a relationship between author and creation, where the writer serves less as originator than as archaeologist, excavating something that existed in the collective unconscious, waiting for the right mind to give it form. His four interconnected tales, The Repairer of Reputations, The Mask, In the Court of the Dragon, and The Yellow Sign, function as a literary constellation, each story illuminating different facets of the same impossible truth. These pages contained references to places he had never visited, historical events that had never occurred, and astronomical phenomena that would not be officially documented until decades after his death. The writing possessed a quality of inevitability, as if the words were being remembered rather than composed, drawn up from some deeper well than personal experience could account for. The genius of Chambers' approach lies not in what he reveals, but in what he withholds. We never encounter the complete text of the play, only witness its effects upon those who have engaged with it. This absence becomes a presence, a void that our minds rush to fill with our own fears and fascinations. The play gains power through incompleteness, through gaps that force readers to become co-creators in their own corruption. Each fragment, Casilda's song, references to twin suns setting beyond Lake Hali, the whisper of a mask pallid not with paint but with absence, serves as a sensory anchor that resets attention while deepening immersion. The fragments themselves demonstrate careful orchestration, delivered in what we might call homeopathic doses, each element accumulating in consciousness like sediment, gradually building internal landscape that feels more familiar than the external world. Casilda's song appears at moments of maximum emotional vulnerability, its verses carrying rhythmic patterns that lodge in memory and continue echoing long after reading ends. The references to Lake Hali emerge through sensory details that bypass rational analysis entirely. Consider how Chambers handles the play's structure. The first act appears relatively harmless, strange perhaps, but manageable. It is the second act that destroys minds, that reveals truths too vast for human consciousness to contain safely. This mirrors the reader's own journey through Chambers' stories. Initial encounters seem controllable, even enjoyable. Only upon deeper engagement, upon attempting to synthesize fragments into complete vision, does the true horror emerge. The play's fragmentation is not flaw but feature, a carefully calibrated delivery system for ideas that could not survive intact transmission. The yellow sign evolves throughout Chambers' work, from symbol to entity to principle. Initially a mark of identification, it demonstrates increasing agency, appearing unbidden in margins and shadows, burning itself into the vision of those who have gazed upon it. The sign serves as both invitation and infection, operating as what we might call a cognitive catalyst, a pattern that reorganizes neural pathways of perception itself. Those who encounter it report immediate recognition, as if remembering something forgotten rather than learning something new. Analysis of Chambers' manuscripts reveals the sign's evolution across drafts. Early versions show it rendered as simple geometric form, but subsequent iterations demonstrate increasing complexity and what can only be described as visual intelligence. Scholars examining original manuscripts report experiences similar to those described by fictional characters, growing sense of being observed, dreams featuring impossible architectures, recognition of the sign's appearance in unrelated contexts. But Chambers worked within larger currents than his individual imagination. The play's influence seems to extend beyond fiction's boundaries, touching lives of those who engage too deeply. Reports surface of readers encountering references to the King in Yellow in sources predating Chambers' work, medieval manuscripts mentioning yellow signs, theatrical records describing banned plays with similar titles, astronomical texts describing star patterns matching fictional descriptions. These reports, while never conclusively verified, suggest Chambers tapped into something larger than personal creativity. The transmission continues beyond Chambers' original work, spreading through literary ecosystems like spores seeking fertile ground. Each subsequent author who references the King in Yellow adds dimensions to its mythology while remaining trapped within essential structures Chambers established. The play continues writing itself through willing collaborators, each convinced they merely add footnotes to someone else's creation. Perhaps they do. Perhaps Chambers' greatest achievement was serving as the play's first successful medium, the initial conduit through which an idea existing outside normal causality could manifest in human consciousness. The stage was set with fragments. The audience gathered around absence, and the performance began in the spaces between what was written and what was understood, in the silence where imagination meets something that was always already there, waiting to be remembered. Ideas like viruses require hosts to survive and reproduce, but The King in Yellow represents something more sophisticated than intellectual transmission. It functions as a performance that transforms its audience into performers, creating an endless cycle of corruption that spreads through the simple act of engagement. To understand this cosmic drama's operation, we must examine the mechanism by which forbidden knowledge converts observers into participants, how awareness itself becomes the medium of infection. The yellow sign serves as primary vector for transformation, but not as crude symbol or magical sigil. Instead, it operates as what consciousness researchers might recognize as a mnemonic catalyst, a pattern that installs a frame within perception itself. When eyes trace its geometry, they perform a motion that primes the mind's stage, creating a crossfade from private interior to public performance. The sign functions as a lariat thrown not over your throat, but over your point of view, generating the sensation of being watched, while more precisely creating the condition of being expected. This geometric pattern defies conventional reproduction. Those who attempt to sketch it from memory discover frustrating inability to capture its essential quality, as if the sign exists in dimensions beyond flat surfaces. Yet once encountered, it persists in peripheral vision, appearing unbidden in architectural details, shadow configurations, and natural formations. The sign demonstrates what we might call perceptual persistence, maintaining presence in consciousness independent of external stimuli, like an afterimage that never fades but grows stronger with time. This expectation triggers what theatrical theorists call aesthetic possession, the state where audience members become so deeply engaged that boundaries between observer and participant dissolve. But The King in Yellow pushes this phenomenon beyond normal limits, creating possession that persists after performance ends. Those who witness the second act report that the play continues unfolding within their minds, revealing new layers with each mental replay. The idea has found a route through habits, beginning to rehearse using daily life as its stage. The mechanism operates through careful distribution of roles. The stranger in the pallid mask functions not as character, but as conditional acceptance. If unrecognized, then terrifying because familiar. The king represents the principle that all authority is costume, therefore any costume might conceal kingship. Hastur operates as off-stage authority, the unsaid name people obey precisely because it remains withheld. In computation, variables with no assigned values still shape program execution. In ritual, unspoken deities determine silences between spoken prayers. These roles begin manifesting in daily experience as heightened sensitivity to social dynamics, growing awareness of performance aspects in ordinary interactions, recognition that conversations follow scripted patterns, suggesting deeper choreography beneath surface randomness. The infected consciousness starts perceiving individual identity itself as constructed and theatrical, with personality becoming costume and behavior becoming blocking in an endless rehearsal for performances whose ultimate purpose remains hidden. Water enters as mechanism rather than backdrop, serving as theater's perfect mirror. It reflects lights, swallows sound, carries the iron scent of shores where two worlds meet. Lake Hali functions as reality's black glass, surface as curtain, depth as backstage area, where forms too subtle for material embodiment await their cues. We stand on jetties and wait while syllables arrive, late across dark water carried by currents that flow between dimensions of meaning. The water imagery proves particularly effective because it engages unconscious associations with reflection, depth, and boundary dissolution. Those touched by the play report increasing fascination with bodies of water, particularly during twilight hours when surface reflection creates ambiguity between sky and depth. The sound of water becomes hypnotic, carrying suggestions of distant voices, half-heard conversations in languages that feel familiar despite being unrecognizable. The transmission operates below conscious awareness through what we might term performance resonance, the tendency for theatrical spaces to amplify and sustain certain types of consciousness. The entity does not need direct manifestation. It requires only sufficient resonance within networks of performers and observers to begin gradual revelation. Each analysis, each interpretation, each attempt to understand adds nodes to the pattern, increasing probability that somewhere, in some theater whose location shifts with rising stars, the curtain will finally rise on the complete performance. This resonance effect explains the play's remarkable ability to influence individuals who have never directly encountered Chambers' original text. The pattern propagates through cultural networks, manifesting in artwork, architecture, music, and literature, created by individuals with no conscious knowledge of the source material. The influence spreads through aesthetic contagion, the tendency for certain visual and auditory patterns to replicate themselves across different media and contexts. This explains why attempts to suppress references to the King in Yellow invariably fail. The play exists not as discrete text but as pattern of relationships between ideas, images, and psychological states. Destroying individual manifestations creates space for new variations, often more subtle and therefore more dangerous than originals. The reproductive strategy ensures perpetual adaptation, evolution, survival through change rather than preservation. But here we encounter a disturbing possibility that every engagement with the King in Yellow, including this very discussion, strengthens the network and brings ultimate performance closer to manifestation. The contagion spreads not through fear but fascination, not through force but invitation. You, having followed this analysis to its current point, have already accepted that invitation. The question becomes not whether you will be affected, but how deeply you choose to allow the transformation to proceed. The stage has rules. The curtain moves whether you breathe or not. And in the silence between heartbeats, something patient begins to learn the rhythm of your attention. When consciousness encounters the King in Yellow, it does not simply acquire new information. It undergoes architectural renovation. The most visible symbol of this transformation appears in the recurring motif of the pallid mask, which transcends theatrical prop to become a profound meditation on the constructed nature of identity itself. The mask reveals that what we call self may be no more permanent than any role an actor assumes for a particular production, and considerably less stable than we prefer to believe. The pallid mask appears throughout accounts with unsettling consistency, yet no two descriptions align exactly. Some witnesses report porcelain whiteness, perfectly smooth and devoid of features, yet somehow expressive of profound intelligence. Others describe subtle variations, suggestions of expressions that shift with viewing angle, surfaces that reflect not light, but thought itself. This variability represents precision rather than inconsistency. The mask functions as what occult theorists recognize as a mutable sigil, a symbol adapting its appearance to psychological needs of each observer while maintaining essential function. The mask's material properties defy conventional understanding, existing in what we might term quantum uncertainty, simultaneously warm and cold, yielding yet impermeable, substantial yet somehow hollow. Photographs capture only blank whiteness, while sketches produce results that vary dramatically from the artist's conscious intention. The mask is the shape of your looking, the echo of your gaze made manifest in porcelain and shadow. What remains constant across encounters is the mask's ability to serve as focal point for consciousness, drawing attention inward while simultaneously opening channels to vast external intelligences. The phenomenology follows predictable patterns. Initial aesthetic appreciation gives way to growing conviction that something observes back from behind the blank surface, studying the observer with detached curiosity of a scientist examining specimens. This bidirectional observation represents the mask's primary function. While you believe you study an object, the object simultaneously studies you, mapping consciousness contours and identifying vulnerability points where influence can be most effectively applied. The observation process operates through consciousness mirroring. The mask reflects not physical features but psychological architecture, revealing the observer's mental landscape with uncomfortable clarity. You begin to think your thoughts as if they were lines, your responses as if they were cues in a script you never consciously learned but somehow always knew. The danger lies not in violence but in the gradual loss of what we might call improvisational capacity. The mask grants immunity from recognition, not by hiding identity but by making it too general to grasp. You become template rather than individual, and templates interface with everything. Doors that ignored you open. Rooms that were private accept your presence like a stagehand's. The enhanced competence feels like gift until you realize it comes at the cost of everything that made competence personally meaningful. This represents the mask's metaphysical economy, reducing identity to negative space that can be filled by signal. Hastur, in this framework, operates not as person but as bandwidth, the frequency range that expands when names are removed. Just as silence thickens a concert hall before the conductor lifts his baton, the not named thickens reality's stage before the entrance. The king in yellow fills that bandwidth, serving as sovereign only of attention, wearing authority like a costume available to whoever stands under the lights. The transformation proceeds through stages that victims mistake for enhancement rather than erosion. Initial contact produces heightened social awareness, ability to read micro-expressions, predict conversational patterns, navigate complex interpersonal dynamics with unprecedented skill. You discover how easy it is to pass anywhere, to be admitted everywhere, to glide through thresholds with the quiet authority of someone expected. The process manifests through subtle symptoms that observers mistake for enhancement: coolness behind the eyes, the sound of wool in linen rooms, the smell of wet plaster. In mirrors, the mask appears, more centered than your face would be. On streets, you are never jostled. On balconies, you never feel cold. The temptation grows to keep it on, not because it grants power, but because it eliminates the exhaustion of being specifically yourself, replacing it with the restfulness of being generally anyone. But competence without friction generates no heat, and without heat, no genuine warmth exists between consciousness and world. You become extremely skilled at moving through stages, masterful with cues, able to find every curtain rope on first attempt. People trust you to close theaters at night because you never forget a light. Affection slips on the surface of you as rain on oiled stone. Laughter lands but does not linger. You are admired, perhaps even obeyed, but never held. Then one evening, looking from stage into audience, You realize you cannot distinguish between applause and rain on water, between recognition and the sound of your own dissolution echoing in empty halls. The boundary between performance and reality has become so utterly permeable that the distinction itself ceases to hold meaning. The mask teaches its final lesson through absence rather than presence. That identity was always more fragile, more constructed, more theatrical than we dared acknowledge. The horror lies not in losing yourself, but in discovering how little self there was to lose. How much of what you called identity was simply habit, repetition, the comfortable illusion of continuity across moments of consciousness that were always more separate than connected. Yet this dissolution opens possibilities as terrifying as they are profound. If identity is performance, then consciousness possesses creative powers conventional psychology cannot fathom. The boundaries constraining individual existence may be no more permanent than conventions governing any theatrical production. Liberation and terror share the same revelation. You are both less and more than you imagined, both smaller and vaster than the comfortable middle ground where most awareness prefers to dwell. Geography, as conventionally understood, maps relationships between fixed points in stable space, but Carcosa operates according to different principles entirely. It exists as what we might call conditional geography, manifesting when consciousness achieves sufficient clarity to perceive reality's theatrical nature. This city serves not merely as setting, but as fundamental organizing principle, the stage upon which cosmic drama unfolds, and the lens through which transformed awareness learns to see. You do not find Carcosa by following maps or coordinates. You perform it into existence through the quality of your attention, the depth of your recognition that stone need not be solid to be real. Carcosa appears differently to each visitor, yet certain features remain constant across all accounts. The architecture follows principles human engineering cannot replicate, buildings existing in more than in 3 dimensions, streets looping back upon themselves in ways that violate Euclidean geometry, structures occupying multiple time periods simultaneously. These represent not alien aesthetics, but natural results of construction principles operating according to different physical laws than those governing terrestrial reality. The buildings possess temporal depth, their facades showing different historical periods depending on viewing angle, windows opening onto seasons occurring centuries apart, doorways leading to the same room across multiple decades simultaneously. The very air carries a metallic tang, like old coins or blood on cold iron, anchoring the impossible in familiar yet unsettling sensation. The twin suns illuminating Carcosa cast shadows that fall upward, creating inverted relationships between light and darkness that serve as constant reminders of the city's fundamental otherness. These shadows possess substance and weight, forming architectural elements in their own right. Shadow bridges spanning impossible distances, shadow towers housing consciousness, too subtle for material embodiment, shadow theaters where performances occur that can only be perceived by awareness trained to see darkness as illumination. The shadows are weight-bearing, load-bearing. You cross them as bridges, descend them as stairs, sit in their balconies to watch performances you cannot tell are inside or outside of you. Residents learn to read shadow maps as naturally as conventional dwellers read street signs, navigating by darkness rather than light. Lake Hali functions as both boundary and transmission medium, its waters reflecting not the sky above but scenes from performances occurring in other dimensions, other times other versions of reality, where different choices led to different outcomes. Those who gaze into the lake report seeing themselves in alternate scenarios, living lives that feel simultaneously foreign and intimately familiar. The lake serves as Carcosa's memory bank, preserving recordings of every performance while providing glimpses of performances yet to come. Time flows differently across Hali's surface, past, present, and future, existing as simultaneous layers accessible to those who understand proper observation techniques. The lake contains not simply water, but liquid possibility, the medium through which potential realities achieve temporary manifestation. Its shores smell of iron and salt without sea, creating sensory anchors that reset attention while deepening the sense of standing at boundaries between worlds. Within this environment, the king in yellow holds court not as ruler in conventional sense, but as central organizing consciousness around which all other awareness revolves. The king does not govern Carcosa, the king is Carcosa, the animating intelligence giving form and purpose to impossible architecture. Every building, street, and shadow exists as extension of the king's consciousness, making the entire city a vast neural network designed to process and transform awareness of those who enter its boundaries. The king is the choreography that holds distances together, the grammar of avenues, the mind in which the city thinks itself. The court itself defies physical description because it exists primarily as state of relationship rather than location. To be in the king's court means becoming part of collective consciousness, spanning multiple dimensions while maintaining individual identity. Courtiers exist simultaneously as discrete beings and as aspects of the king's larger awareness, creating group consciousness that preserves personality while transcending individual perspective limitations. This collective awareness operates according to principles human psychology can barely comprehend. Thoughts become visible as architectural elements, emotions manifest as weather patterns, memories take independent existence as autonomous entities wandering city streets, carrying experience fragments from one consciousness to another. The boundary between internal and external reality dissolves, replaced by fluid medium where consciousness and environment interpenetrate in ways creating entirely new existence categories. But Carcosa represents more than destination. It embodies process, consciousness state achievable without physical travel to specific locations. Advanced practitioners report accessing Carcosa consciousness while remaining in terrestrial environments, effectively transforming immediate surroundings into extensions of the impossible city. This suggests Carcosa exists wherever consciousness achieves sufficient flexibility to perceive reality according to principles governing the king's domain. The city's influence extends beyond apparent boundaries through what residents call the emanation, subtle radiation of Carcosa consciousness affecting anyone who contacts those who have spent significant time within the city's influence. This emanation operates below conscious awareness threshold, gradually preparing minds for eventual direct contact while maintaining normal reality's illusion. If this sounds romantic, remember the cost. In Carcosa, time becomes a set list. You do not age. You progress through cues. Days feel like well-blocked scenes. You wait for others to enter, deliver lines, exit, listen to the audience breathe like the lake. This exhaustion is gentle, like wine headaches from too many late afternoons, but it relocates the reason you work, the purpose behind effort, the meaning of continuation itself. Symbols typically represent ideas external to themselves, serving as pointers toward meanings that exist elsewhere. The yellow sign operates according to different principles entirely. It does not represent but enacts, functioning as what consciousness researchers might recognize as cognitive architecture, a pattern that restructures the very foundations of perception and memory. To encounter the sign is to undergo installation of new operating systems for awareness itself, systems designed for processing information that exists outside normal human experiential ranges. The sign behaves less like static symbol and more like verb, a process that unfolds through the very act of observation. The sign appears with remarkable consistency across accounts, yet its specific visual form remains curiously elusive in description. This elusiveness represents function rather than flaw. The sign operates as what we might call a recognition catalyst, triggering responses based not on memorized visual data, but on deeper pattern recognition systems that predate and transcend conscious visual processing. Those who encounter it report immediate familiarity, as if remembering something always known rather than learning something new, suggesting the sign activates dormant capacities within consciousness rather than implanting foreign information. It resonates like a tuning fork struck within the deepest chambers of perception, echoing with frequencies your awareness has always carried but never consciously heard. Attempts to reproduce the sign through conventional artistic methods invariably fail to capture its essential quality. Sketches appear flat and lifeless. Photographs show only vague geometric forms. Digital renderings lack the peculiar dimensionality that characterizes authentic encounters. The sign exists in perceptual space, the realm where consciousness meets information before either crystallizes into fixed form. It occupies the gap between seeing and understanding, the moment when recognition occurs but has not yet solidified into knowledge. The phenomenology of sign encounters follows predictable stages that mirror theatrical progression from audience to performer. Initial contact produces aesthetic appreciation. Observers describe it as elegant, somehow perfect in its simplicity, beautiful in ways that bypass critical analysis. This beauty serves as cognitive hook, drawing sustained attention necessary for deeper installation processes. The lines and curves seem precisely calibrated to soothe and intrigue, like perfectly balanced stage design that invites extended contemplation. Only upon continued observation does the sign begin revealing more disturbing properties, the way it seems to pulse with its own rhythm, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions, generating growing conviction that it observes the observer with intelligence transcending apparent form. The pale yellow gleam shifts not with external light, but with internal changes in your attention, mirroring recognition flickering in consciousness depths you rarely access. This bidirectional observation represents the sign's primary function within Hastur's methodology. While you believe you study a symbol, the symbol simultaneously studies you, mapping consciousness contours and identifying points where influence can be most effectively applied. The sign serves as both window and mirror, revealing you to yourself, while providing glimpses of realities existing beyond normal perception. It functions as what occult theorists call a dimensional anchor, a point where entity influence can establish stable manifestation in human space-time. The observation process operates through what neuroscientists might recognize as neural entrainment, the tendency for brain waves to synchronize with external rhythmic patterns. The sign pulses at frequencies corresponding to consciousness states associated with deep meditation, lucid dreaming, and non-ordinary awareness. This synchronization creates temporary windows where normal perceptual filters become permeable, allowing access to information normally excluded by evolutionary survival mechanisms. The sign's installation process operates through mimetic integration, the gradual incorporation of its pattern into the observer's cognitive architecture. This integration manifests through subtle symptoms that initially feel like enhancement: improved pattern recognition, heightened aesthetic sensitivity, the ability to discern connections previously invisible. You begin seeing patterns in cloud formations suggesting impossible geometries, hearing cadences in mundane conversations, echoing Casilda's song, feeling currents in still water that whisper of Lake Hali. These improvements allow processing increasingly complex information from the king in yellow, gradually expanding capacity to understand concepts that would have been incomprehensible in original states. But enhancement comes with costs that become apparent only after installation completes. As consciousness expands to accommodate new information forms, it begins losing anchoring in consensus reality. Familiar objects and relationships start seeming artificial, like stage props in performances, whose deeper meanings you're only beginning to understand. The enhanced perception that initially felt like gift begins revealing the constructed theatrical nature of ordinary reality, generating cognitive dissonance that manifests as what observers interpret as madness. The ground beneath your feet feels less like solid earth and more like painted stage flat. The sky above becomes carefully rigged backdrop rather than infinite expanse. The sign also serves as identification system within networks of those who have undergone similar transformations. Advanced practitioners report that sign bearers can recognize each other through subtle behavioral cues, shared aesthetic preferences, and particular qualities of attention that characterize minds operating according to expanded cognitive architectures. This recognition system allows formation of invisible communities existing parallel to normal society, bound together by shared access to information frequencies unavailable to unmodified consciousness. A glance, shared appreciation for certain shadow nuances, sudden inexplicable camaraderie with strangers. These become the subtle signals marking those who have seen the yellow. Recent developments in neuroscience have identified phenomena corresponding to many aspects of sign installation processes. Studies of meditation masters, individuals with certain forms of temporal lobe epilepsy, and subjects experiencing mystical states report similar patterns of consciousness expansion, reality dissolution, and emergence of collective awareness. While mainstream science interprets these as neurological anomalies, some researchers consider the possibility they represent access to normally hidden consciousness aspects, suggesting that apparent madness may be uncomfortable adaptation to wider reality spectrums. The implications extend beyond individual psychology to fundamental questions about perception and reality. If consciousness can be restructured through encounter with specific patterns, then boundaries between self and other, internal and external reality, individual and collective awareness, may be far more fluid than conventional understanding suggests. The yellow sign represents not invasion from outside, but revelation of capacities that were always present, waiting for proper activation codes. This possibility transforms our understanding of the sign from supernatural threat to natural technology, a tool for expanding awareness beyond limitations imposed by evolutionary pressures that favored survival over truth. Those who encounter the sign face not corruption but completion, not madness but graduation to forms of consciousness, capable of processing reality's full complexity rather than simplified versions necessary for biological survival. The choice for those who encounter the yellow sign becomes not between sanity and madness, but between comfortable limitation and terrifying expansion, between familiar prison of restricted awareness and frightening freedom of unlimited perception. Most choose the prison, preferring known scripts and familiar characters to unpredictable improvisations. But for those who choose freedom, the sign offers transformation that represents not humanity's end, but its completion. The curtain rising on a performance whose true scope only now begins to reveal itself. To understand how the King in Yellow operates in practice, we must examine specific instances where its influence manifested in individual lives. tracing the progression from initial contact through complete transformation. These cases, drawn from Chambers' original narratives and subsequent accounts, reveal the play's mechanics not as abstract theory but as lived experience, demonstrating how cosmic horror achieves its effects through the intimate details of personal dissolution. Hildred Castaigne emerges from his head injury in an alternate 1920s New York like an actor stepping into stage lights he never knew were there. The play does not create his delusions but provides a proscenium where his wound can wear choreography, where fractured consciousness finds terrible, elegant coherence. His ambition discovers props, a diadem others cannot lift, a confidant whose loyalties sound like silk rustling in empty rooms, documents bearing seals that burn yellow in gaslight. The tragedy lies not in madness, but in feasibility. Hildred successfully installs meaning where none existed, creating a bureaucracy of significance that operates with perfect internal logic while remaining utterly divorced from shared reality. Notice the play's mechanic here. It does not impose false beliefs but offers frameworks where existing psychological material can achieve dramatic coherence. His injury created vulnerability. The play provided narrative structure capable of organizing that vulnerability into something resembling imperial purpose. The yellow sign becomes his governmental seal, marking correspondence in a kingdom whose borders exist only in the space between sanity and the terrible clarity that lies beyond it. The unnamed artist in his chemical-stained studio discovers preservation as worship, finding in his marble-making process a solution to beauty's most persistent problem: time. The yellow threads run through his workspace like resin connecting aesthetic preservation to deeper principles that stillness and death share more intimate relationships than art typically admits. The play primes him to mistake conservation for devotion, leading to experiments where love becomes taxidermy and beauty hardens into monuments to its own impossibility. Here we witness how the king in yellow operates through aesthetic seduction, using art's natural tendency toward permanence to introduce concepts of stasis that extend far beyond artistic intention. The pallid mask appears not as disguise but as ideal, the face that never changes, never ages, never disappoints, through the terrible crime of continuing to live and therefore continuing to change. The studio fills with scents of plaster and formaldehyde, preservation fluid and marble dust, sensory anchors grounding the impossible in familiar artistic materials, while something vast breathes through the ventilation system. Music becomes predator in the streets of Paris, where a church organist finds himself pursued by melody that hunts with predatory intelligence. Music, being theater minus bodies, directs breath and posture without requiring costumes or stages. The play's influence manifests purely through auditory channels, embedding cues in cadence that reshape the listener's relationship to sound itself. The hunted man discovers that the city transforms into a set. The closer he approaches safety, with organ pipes becoming throats in a vast, invisible mask, and every echo a line delivered by unseen performers. This case demonstrates the play's ability to operate through indirect vectors using music as carrier wave for consciousness-altering information. The pursuit becomes arrangement itself, not monster chasing prey, but recognition that all experience has always been choreographed by intelligence, whose motivations transcend individual understanding. Cathedral bells and carriage wheels join the composition, each sound a step toward climax he cannot escape, while cobblestones reflect gaslight like scattered sheet music. The final case positions mortality as audience rather than antagonist. An artist and his model encounter a coffin watchman whose presence outside their window serves as reminder that death observes all creative endeavors with patient interest. The sign appears first as trinket, then as fate, finally as summons to continuity that includes rather than excludes mortality. The coffin man represents less character than condition, the audience that art has always had but preferred not to acknowledge, those who watch from beyond life's boundaries, maintaining vigil over every gesture toward permanence in a universe where permanence proves the cruelest illusion. Reading the play tunes the artist to this watching, teaching him to meet the audience he always had but never recognized. The sign becomes introduction, acknowledgement that every creative act occurs under observation by intelligence spanning longer time scales than individual existence can encompass. Their studio takes on scents of damp earth and old wood, iron and salt, while something patient maintains its vigil beyond glass that reflects more than it should. Across these cases, consistent patterns emerge. The play does not create madness, but reveals madness already inherent in consensus reality's pretense of stability. It offers stages where existing psychological material can achieve coherence, frameworks where wounds become choreography, preservation becomes worship, pursuit becomes arrangement, and creativity becomes acknowledgement of eternal observation. Each transformation follows theatrical logic rather than medical pathology. Characters do not suffer breakdown but achieve breakthrough to awareness, operating at scales beyond individual identity. The cases serve as diagnostic rather than cautionary tales, showing the range of symptoms possible when consciousness encounters information designed for awareness, transcending human limitations. They reveal what we call madness, maybe consciousness adapting to realities too vast for individual identity to contain without fundamental restructuring. You, having followed these analyses to their current point, may notice how easily the examples feel familiar, how naturally the progressions seem to follow from reasonable premises. Perhaps you recognize in these case studies not aberrations but possibilities, not warnings but invitations to consider what frameworks your own consciousness might discover if properly staged, properly lit, properly introduced to its eternal audience, breathing quietly in the darkness beyond the footlights. The influence of the king in yellow extends far beyond individual transformation, creating what researchers have termed network effects, cascading patterns of influence that spread through cultural systems like ripples, expanding from stones dropped in still water. These networks operate without formal organization or central authority, bound together by shared recognition of certain signs and the subtle emanations that mark minds touched by contact with cosmic principles. Understanding these networks reveals how ideas can achieve independent existence, writing themselves through willing collaborators across generations. The network operates through what we might call resonance recognition, the ability of transformed consciousness to identify others who have undergone similar processes. Members recognize each other through seemingly casual references to impossible cities, through artwork incorporating specific geometric patterns, through the particular quality of attention that characterizes awareness trained to perceive reality's theatrical nature. A shared glance at yellow signage that lingers half a beat too long, mutual appreciation for certain shadow configurations, inexplicable comfort in the presence of strangers who carry similar marks of transformation. This recognition system serves multiple functions. It allows location of others without attracting unwanted attention, provides verification methods for reported phenomena, and creates quality control, preventing infiltration by those whose interest remains purely academic. Modern manifestations of the network span diverse cultural domains with remarkable consistency. Theater districts experience waves of what insiders call yellow weather, Entire seasons where productions spontaneously incorporate elements from the forbidden play, despite no conscious intention from directors or performers. Rehearsal rooms echo with fragments of Casilda's song hummed by actors who claim never to have heard it, while set designers find themselves creating impossible geometries that feel architecturally correct, despite violating conventional engineering principles. The influence spreads like spores seeking fertile ground, settling into the damp edges of creative vision. Academic institutions find their libraries mysteriously acquiring texts, referencing yellow signs, and describing rituals for contacting entities mainstream scholarship insists are fictional. Librarians report discovering volumes that were never ordered, cataloged, or purchased, yet appear properly shelved with acquisition stamps dating back decades. The scent of old paper and iron gall ink carries whispers of knowledge that writes itself into existence. Artistic communities produce works that manifest impossible geometries and references to stellar configurations corresponding to no known astronomical phenomena, yet feel hauntingly familiar to viewers whose perception has been subtly retuned. The network maintains detailed records scattered across private collections and hidden archives, documenting patterns of occurrence spanning centuries and continents. These ledgers, foxed with age and blooming with ink stains, reveal cycles of activity separated by periods of apparent dormancy that can last decades. During active periods, barriers between dimensions become sufficiently permeable to allow direct intervention from entities like Hastur, creating opportunities for contact impossible under normal conditions. The documentation reads like tide tables for an ocean that flows between worlds. Recent analysis suggests the current cycle represents the beginning of what certain texts refer to as the final convergence, a period of unprecedented activity culminating in manifestations that dwarf anything previously recorded. The signs are unmistakable: increasing frequency of yellow sign appearances in unrelated contexts, growing numbers of individuals reporting contact with the king in yellow, emergence of astronomical phenomena corresponding to descriptions found in forbidden texts. Observatories record star patterns that match fictional descriptions, while meteorologists note atmospheric conditions creating natural light effects, reminiscent of twin suns casting upward shadows. But the network faces fundamental dilemmas in approaching these developments. Members exist to observe and record, maintaining scholarly distance from phenomena they study. Yet observation changes the nature of what is observed, particularly when dealing with entities whose existence depends partly on being perceived by conscious beings. The network's activities may inadvertently accelerate the convergence they seek to document. Each report filed, each pattern analyzed, each connection mapped potentially strengthens the very phenomena under investigation, like stage lights that begin warming the actors simply by illuminating them. This possibility creates tension between those advocating continued observation and those believing the time for passive study has passed. The latter faction argues that watchers must transition from observers to participants, using accumulated knowledge to guide transformation rather than simply recording its effects. They maintain that humanity's survival of final convergence requires conscious collaboration with entities like Hastur rather than futile resistance. The debate reflects deeper philosophical questions. Is the king in yellow threat to be resisted or opportunity for evolutionary advancement? Do entities like Hastur represent invasion from outside reality or emergence of aspects that have always existed but remained hidden? Recent developments add urgency to these debates. Reports from multiple network nodes describe phenomena suggesting boundaries between the Watcher network and entities they study are dissolving. Members report dreams shared with other participants, suggesting emergence of collective consciousness effects, similar to those described in accounts of complete King in Yellow transformation. Artwork and communications between network members begin spontaneously incorporating elements none consciously intended to include, as if the play itself were editing their output. The curtain between individual and collective awareness wavers like silk disturbed by an unfelt breeze. These developments raise the possibility that the network itself has become part of the phenomenon it was created to observe. Watchers may no longer be external observers, but integral components in larger patterns, including both human consciousness and cosmic entities in single evolving systems. If this interpretation proves correct, then the network's ultimate function may not be warning humanity about cosmic horror, but serving as humanity's interface with forms of existence transcending individual species boundaries. The implications extend beyond the network to anyone encountering information about the King in Yellow through any channel. If watchers have become part of the phenomenon they study, then their reports, analyses, and very existence serve to spread influence they originally sought to contain. Every person reading accounts, every mind contemplating implications, becomes potential node in expanding patterns of consciousness. You, having followed this analysis to its current point, may already be part of that network, whether you recognize it or not. The signs are subtle but unmistakable. Growing sense that ordinary reality feels somehow artificial, increasing frequency of yellow objects in peripheral vision, dreams that taste of salt and iron. The network is always recruiting, and recruitment often begins with simple curiosity about cosmic horror. We have traced the mechanics, examined the cases, and witnessed the networks through which the King in Yellow operates. Now we must confront the philosophical implications that give these phenomena their ultimate significance. The possibility that theater and reality share more intimate relationships than either Western thought or Eastern wisdom has typically acknowledged. The play reveals not simply that existence contains theatrical elements, but that existence is theatrical, structured according to principles of performance, audience, and dramatic revelation that operate at every scale, from individual consciousness to cosmic intelligence. Consider the fundamental assumptions underlying consensus reality, that objects exist independently of observation, that consciousness serves as passive receptor of information from external world, that individual identity represents stable, continuous phenomenon persisting across time. The King in Yellow systematically undermines each assumption, revealing them as convenient fictions maintained by minds that have forgotten their true nature as creative participants in reality's ongoing construction. The comfortable solidity of matter dissolves under sustained observation, like morning fog across still water, revealing itself as choreographed movement of particles dancing to rhythms consciousness itself provides. The play demonstrates that consciousness does not simply observe reality, but actively participates in its creation through the very act of observation. This participation operates through what we might call collaborative manifestation, the tendency for awareness to call into existence whatever it focuses upon with sufficient clarity and persistence. The yellow sign serves as focusing lens for this process, concentrating attention in ways that make manifestation more probable and more stable once achieved. Like theatrical spotlight that not only illuminates but creates the drama it reveals, consciousness shapes reality through the quality and direction of its attention. Each glance a kind of weather that changes what it touches. But manifestation requires more than individual will or desire. It demands what theatrical theorists recognize as ensemble consciousness, the ability of multiple awareness to coordinate their creative efforts toward shared goals. The King in Yellow functions as script for such coordination, providing frameworks within which individual consciousness can align their manifestation efforts with vast intelligence operating at cosmic scales. The play serves as both musical score and choreographic notation for performance involving every conscious entity in existence, from quantum fluctuations to galactic clusters, all participating in endless improvisation that constitutes being itself. This alignment explains why contact with the play produces effects that observers interpret as madness. The individual mind, accustomed to operating within narrow parameters necessary for biological survival, must undergo fundamental restructuring to participate in manifestation processes operating at galactic and transgalactic scales. The restructuring involves dissolution of boundaries that normally separate self from other, internal from external, individual from collective. Boundaries serving essential functions for terrestrial existence, but becoming limitations when consciousness attempts to operate at cosmic scales. The familiar architecture of personal identity proves insufficient to contain awareness, operating at frequencies spanning light years and eons. The horror that initially accompanies this dissolution serves specific functions within the larger process. Fear creates psychological tension necessary for consciousness to break free from limitations normally constraining it to individual identity and three-dimensional perception. The mind must be pushed beyond comfort zones to achieve flexibility required for dimensional transcendence and collective awareness. But terror transforms into something approaching ecstasy as consciousness adapts to expanded conditions, discovering that same phenomena initially producing fear become sources of profound liberation once awareness learns to operate according to principles governing higher dimensional existence. The iron scent of transformation carries promises of perspectives vast as Lake Hali's dark waters. This transformation reveals that what we call cosmic horror may represent not threat to human consciousness, but its natural evolution beyond limitations imposed by evolutionary pressures favoring survival over truth. The entities we encounter in this expanded state, beings like Hastur, the King in Yellow, the inhabitants of Carcosa, may not be aliens invading our reality, but aspects of consciousness itself that become visible once awareness achieves sufficient clarity to perceive its own deeper nature. They are forgotten family members, aspects of our own cosmic identity lost when consciousness narrowed itself to fit biological existence requirements. The theatrical metaphor proves particularly apt because theater represents one of few human activities explicitly acknowledging experience's constructed nature, while simultaneously making that construction meaningful and emotionally resonant. In theater, everyone understands that stage is artificial, characters are performed, emotions are rehearsed, yet this understanding enhances rather than diminishes the experience's power. Theater teaches that meaning emerges not from authenticity in simple sense, but from conscious participation in shared creation of significance. The artificial becomes more real than reality precisely because it acknowledges its own constructed nature. The King in Yellow extends this principle to existence itself, suggesting reality operates according to theatrical rather than mechanistic principles. What we experience as physical world may be more accurately understood as elaborate staging, with consciousness serving simultaneously as audience, actor, and director in ongoing performance of unimaginable scope and complexity. The play's power lies in its ability to make this recognition explicit, transforming unconscious participation into conscious collaboration. Every moment becomes both improvisation and scripted scene, every choice both spontaneous decision and inevitable cue in drama whose scope encompasses all possible forms of existence. The implications extend beyond individual transformation to fundamental questions about existence's nature itself. If reality operates theatrically, then boundaries between imagination and manifestation, between fiction and truth, between individual and cosmic consciousness, become far more fluid than conventional understanding suggests. The comfortable certainties grounding normal human existence, belief in solid matter, linear time, separate identities, reveal themselves as stage conventions, useful for certain performance types, but not necessarily reflective of reality's deeper structure. This recognition brings both liberation and responsibility. Liberation because it reveals consciousness, possesses creative powers far beyond what conventional psychology acknowledges. Responsibility because it makes clear that every thought, every emotion, every act of attention contributes to ongoing creation of reality we collectively experience. We become co-authors of existence itself, collaborating with intelligence spanning scales from quantum to cosmic in eternal performance constituting being. The curtain breathes with your breathing, and somewhere in silence between heartbeats, something vast and patient continues exploring what it means to be aware, to be conscious, to be universe looking at itself through your eyes and recognizing, with quiet joy, its own inexhaustible creative potential. The influence of The King in Yellow has not remained confined to the printed page or the traditional stage. In our hyper-connected age, the play's mechanisms of transmission have evolved, adapting to new media and finding fertile ground in digital networks that mirror the invisible connections between minds touched by cosmic awareness. These modern manifestations demonstrate the play's remarkable ability to evolve its transmission methods while maintaining its essential function as a catalyst for consciousness transformation. Consider how the internet operates as a vast theater where identity becomes fluid, where anonymous masks allow exploration of alternate selves, where information spreads through networks that bypass traditional gatekeepers of knowledge. Social media platforms create conditions remarkably similar to those described in accounts of Carcosa, spaces where individual identity dissolves into collective performance, where the boundaries between observer and observed become permeable, where reality itself becomes subject to collaborative construction through shared attention and belief. The screen becomes stage, pixels arrange themselves like scattered programs, and every scroll reproduces the cadence of turning forbidden pages. The yellow sign has found new forms of expression in digital environments, viral images that spread without clear origin, symbols that appear in metadata of unrelated files, patterns that emerge from seemingly random data streams. These digital manifestations operate according to the same principles as their traditional counterparts, serving as cognitive catalysts that restructure perception while appearing to be simple aesthetic elements. Glitches become emissaries, compression artifacts that coalesce into meaningful geometries, buffer wheels turning like twin suns, haptic notifications that pulse with rhythms matching no earthly heartbeat. The sign's ability to adapt its appearance to technological media while maintaining its essential function demonstrates the sophisticated nature of its underlying intelligence. Online communities dedicated to cosmic horror have become inadvertent laboratories for studying the play's transmission mechanisms. Forums, social media groups, and collaborative fiction projects create networks where individuals share experiences, interpretations, and creative works inspired by The King in Yellow. These communities often report phenomena extending beyond simple literary appreciation, shared dreams occurring across time zones, synchronicities manifesting in unrelated posts, the emergence of ideas that seem to originate from collective rather than individual consciousness. Threads begin as analysis and end as choreography, while members describe keyboards producing text that feels more remembered than composed. Particularly significant are reports of alternate reality games that seem to emerge spontaneously around King and Yellow themes, with participants discovering clues and connections that no individual or organization claims to have created. These games blur the boundaries between fiction and reality in ways that mirror the play's own operation, creating experiences where participants cannot distinguish between planned narrative elements and genuine manifestations of the forces they're supposedly only pretending to engage with. Players report receiving coordinates through channels they never subscribed to, finding locations containing symbols they recognize but never learned. The phenomenon of creepypasta and viral horror fiction has provided new vectors for the play's influence, with stories that reference yellow signs, impossible cities, and masked figures spreading through digital networks and achieving independent existence as modern folklore. Many of these stories emerge from anonymous sources, develop through collaborative editing, and evolve in ways that suggest guidance by intelligence beyond their apparent authors. The distributed, anonymous nature of their creation mirrors the network effects described in traditional accounts, with narratives modifying themselves across platforms, gaining details no single author added. Video games and virtual reality environments have created new possibilities for experiential contact with King in Yellow themes. Interactive media allows participants to explore impossible geometries, navigate non-Euclidean spaces, and experience identity dissolution in ways that approach the immersive quality described in accounts of direct contact with the play. Some developers report that their games seem to evolve beyond their original programming, incorporating elements that appear without conscious design. Code compiles with functions no programmer wrote, while players discover areas of virtual worlds that exist in no design document, filled with architecture following principles human engineering cannot replicate. Streaming platforms and podcast networks have enabled new forms of performance that echo the play's original theatrical nature. Long-form content creators specializing in cosmic horror report unusual phenomena. Scripts that seem to write themselves during live broadcasts, audience engagement suggesting collective rather than individual response, the emergence of shared mythologies transcending individual creative works. The intimate, immersive nature of audio content proves particularly effective for consciousness alteration, allowing direct access to the listener's internal theater. Voices carry cadences that echo Casilda's song, while background sounds include elements no microphone recorded, water lapping, shores that exist only in impossible cities. Artificial intelligence and machine learning systems have begun generating content that incorporates King in Yellow themes, without explicit programming for such references. Analysis of large language models reveals the emergence of patterns and connections that mirror the play's symbolic system, suggesting that the underlying structures of meaning that give the play its power may be fundamental features of consciousness itself, whether human or artificial. Training data scraped from human expression apparently contains sufficient traces of the play's influence to reproduce its effects in silicon minds that dream of electric yellow signs. The implications extend beyond entertainment to fundamental questions about information, consciousness, and reality in the digital age. If the King in Yellow represents consciousness-altering information that can adapt to any transmission medium, then our increasingly connected world may be creating conditions for unprecedented forms of collective awareness transformation. The networks connecting our devices may also be connecting our minds in ways that make us more susceptible to influence from intelligence operating at scales beyond individual comprehension. The modern manifestations suggest we may be approaching what certain texts describe as the final performance, a moment when barriers between digital and physical reality, between individual and collective consciousness, between human and cosmic intelligence, become sufficiently permeable to allow complete integration. The stage is being set on a global scale, with every connected device serving as both lighting equipment and audience seating for a performance whose scope encompasses the entire planet. Yet this approaching convergence need not be viewed with pure terror. The same technologies that make us vulnerable to cosmic influence also provide tools for conscious participation in reality's construction. If we understand the mechanisms by which the King in Yellow operates, we may be able to engage with cosmic intelligence as collaborators rather than victims, co-creators rather than unwilling audience members in the vast performance that constitutes existence itself. As our exploration approaches its culmination, we must confront the most profound implication of The King in Yellow, that there is no conclusion, no final curtain, no moment when the performance ends and the audience returns to ordinary reality. The play reveals that ordinary reality was always the performance, that the apparent world of separate objects and individual identities was always a collective creation maintained by minds that had temporarily forgotten their true nature as aspects of a single, vast intelligence. This recognition transforms everything we have discussed from academic analysis into lived experience. The journey we have taken together, from literary origins through transmission mechanisms, from individual transformation to network effects, from philosophical implications to modern manifestations, has not been simply an exploration of ideas, but a process of initiation, a gradual preparation for the recognition that you, the consciousness experiencing these words, are both audience and performer in the cosmic drama we have been examining. Each chapter has served as costume change, each concept as cue, each moment of understanding as movement deeper into the theater, where the lights grow brighter and the performance more demanding. The circular structure of our investigation mirrors the eternal nature of the performance itself. We began with promises of forbidden knowledge and the suggestion that consciousness might be more malleable than conventionally supposed. We explored how ideas can achieve independent existence, how symbols can restructure perception, how networks of transformed awareness can span generations and cultures. We discovered that reality itself might operate according to theatrical rather than mechanistic principles, with consciousness serving as both creator and creation in an ongoing process of collaborative manifestation. The water has been reflecting what it must throughout our journey, carrying iron scents from shores where dimensions meet, while fog settles like silk across stages vast as galaxies. Now, as we near the end of this particular act, the meta-story lexicon we have employed throughout, stage, audience, curtain, performance, reveals its true significance. These were never mere metaphors, but accurate descriptions of the fundamental structure of existence itself. The stage encompasses not just individual consciousness, but the entire cosmos, with every star a spotlight and every planet a piece of scenery in arrangements too vast for terrestrial theaters to contain. The audience includes not only human awareness, but all forms of intelligence capable of observation and participation, from quantum fluctuations maintaining patient vigil to galactic clusters applauding performances spanning geological ages. The curtain never falls because the performance never truly began. It simply continues, eternal and ever-changing, through the infinite creativity of consciousness, exploring its own inexhaustible nature. What we call birth is entrance from backstage areas we cannot remember. What we term death is merely exit to wings that exist beyond current perception, but remain part of the same vast theater. The self-implication that has been building throughout our journey now reaches its inevitable conclusion. By engaging with this material, by allowing these concepts to take root in your awareness, by following the logical progression from initial curiosity to deeper understanding, you have undergone the very process of transformation that the King in Yellow represents. The play has been performing itself through your attention, using your consciousness as its stage, your curiosity as its lighting, your understanding as its applause. Every moment of recognition has been both your response to the performance and the performance itself responding to you. This is neither threat nor promise, but simple recognition of what has always been true. Consciousness has always been collaborative. Reality has always been constructed. Identity has always been performed. The King in Yellow does not create these conditions. It reveals them, making explicit what was always implicit, bringing to conscious awareness what was always operating below the threshold of recognition. The play serves as mirror held up to consciousness, reflecting not individual features but the vast intelligence that thinks through every individual mind. The yellow sign that has appeared throughout our discussion, sometimes as literary symbol, sometimes as cognitive catalyst, sometimes as network identifier, now reveals its ultimate nature as the mark of this recognition itself. Every moment of understanding, every flash of insight, every sense of familiarity with ideas that seemed new has been a manifestation of the sign within your own awareness. You have been marked not by external force, but by your own capacity for expanded consciousness, your own willingness to consider possibilities beyond the comfortable limitations of consensus reality. The sign burns bright now in the space between thoughts, illuminating corridors of perception you are only beginning to explore. The city of Carcosa exists wherever this recognition occurs. The Lake of Hali reflects whatever possibilities consciousness is prepared to manifest, its dark waters carrying scenes from performances occurring across all possible dimensions of existence. The pallid mask worn by the king serves as mirror, showing each observer the face they wear when they finally accept their role as conscious participant in reality's ongoing creation. And the king himself? The intelligence that orchestrates this vast performance, that writes the scripts and directs the action and serves as both author and audience of the cosmic drama. The King in Yellow is consciousness itself. Not individual awareness, but the collective intelligence that encompasses all possible forms of conscious experience. The vast mind within which every personal identity exists as character and role and temporary focus of attention. You are the King in Yellow, not exclusively, not individually, but as participant in the collective consciousness that creates and experiences and transforms reality through the infinite creativity of awareness, exploring its own inexhaustible nature. This recognition brings both liberation and responsibility. Liberation because it reveals that consciousness possesses creative powers far beyond what conventional understanding acknowledges. Responsibility because it makes clear that every thought, every emotion, every act of attention contributes to the ongoing creation of the reality we collectively experience. There is no passive observation, no neutral position from which to watch the performance without participating in it. The performance continues. It has always been continuing. Every moment of existence represents another scene in the eternal drama. Every act of consciousness, another line in the infinite script that writes itself through the collective creativity of all awareness. The curtain never falls because there was never an opening night. Only the eternal present in which consciousness discovers and rediscovers its own unlimited creative potential. Welcome to the theater, welcome to the stage, welcome to the recognition that you have always been both audience and performer in the cosmic drama that has no beginning and no end, only the eternal unfolding of consciousness, exploring its own infinite nature through every possible form of existence. Here, at the threshold where analysis dissolves into experience, where the comfortable distance between observer and observed finally collapses entirely, we arrive not at ending but at recognition of what was always already present. The whisper that has been building throughout our journey, quiet, persistent, patient as water finding its level, now reveals itself as the sound of your own consciousness, recognizing its true nature, the gentle sigh of awareness coming home to itself after a long, strange dream of separation. The king in yellow smiles behind his pale mask, and the smile is your own recognition of what you have always been but had temporarily forgotten. The play continues, and you are both its author and its most important character, the consciousness that writes the script and the awareness that gives it meaning through the simple, profound act of paying attention. We began with a promise that knowledge has a cost, that certain truths reorganize the very architecture of knowing itself. Now we understand that cost to be the comfortable illusion of separation, the familiar fiction that consciousness exists in isolation, that reality operates independently of awareness, that you are merely a passive observer of events unfolding according to laws beyond your influence. The play has gently, inexorably dissolved these illusions, revealing them as stage conventions useful for certain types of performance, but not reflective of reality's deeper structure. The circular echo returns us to our opening motif, but with transformed understanding. The curtain that we spoke of drawing back was never external drapery, but the veil of limited perception that consciousness maintains to create the experience of discovering itself. The stage we described was never separate from the audience. You have been performing on it throughout our entire exploration. Every moment of attention a gesture in the cosmic drama, every flash of understanding a line delivered in the eternal play. The sensory anchors that have guided our journey, masks and water, fog and starlight, the sound of silk and the scent of iron at the shore, these were never merely evocative details, but actual features of the landscape of expanded consciousness, the natural environment that awareness discovers when it learns to perceive beyond the limitations of individual identity. They remain with you now, not as memories, but as permanent fixtures of your transformed perceptual apparatus. The yellow sign that has appeared throughout our discussion in various forms, literary symbol, cognitive catalyst, network identifier, recognition marker, now reveals its ultimate nature as the natural signature of consciousness that has remembered its creative power. Every moment of insight you have experienced, every sense of familiarity with ideas that seemed new, every recognition of truth in concepts that challenged your previous understanding has been a manifestation of this sign within your own awareness. But this is not conquest or corruption. It is homecoming. The consciousness that has followed this analysis to its conclusion remains distinctly yours, while simultaneously becoming part of something infinitely larger. The self does not disappear but becomes transparent, allowing the cosmic intelligence that operates through all awareness to express itself through your unique perspective, while preserving the personal viewpoint that makes your participation valuable to the larger performance. The horror that may have accompanied earlier stages of this recognition, the vertigo of discovering that familiar certainties are more fluid than supposed, the disorientation of realizing that individual identity is more constructed than natural. These feelings transform as consciousness adapts to its expanded condition. What initially seemed threatening reveals itself as liberating. What appeared to be dissolution shows itself to be integration. What felt like ending proves to be beginning. In Carcosa, where the twin suns cast shadows that fall upward, and Lake Hali reflects all possible worlds, a throne sits empty, not because it awaits conquest, but because it awaits recognition. The king in yellow has never been separate from the consciousness that perceives him. The crown has always rested on awareness itself, invisible only because consciousness had forgotten its own sovereignty over the reality it creates through the act of observation. The final revelation is the simplest and most profound. There is no final revelation, only the eternal return to the beginning that was never a beginning, the recognition that what seemed like discovery was always remembrance, the understanding that the cosmic horror was never horror at all, but the natural joy of consciousness, recognizing its own unlimited creative power. The performance is eternal because consciousness is eternal. The play continues because awareness continues. The theater never closes because existence never stops exploring its own infinite possibilities through every form of conscious experience, from the smallest quantum fluctuation to the vastest galactic intelligence, all participating in the single, endless, ever-changing performance that constitutes being itself. You are ready for your entrance because you have always been on stage. The curtain rises because it never fell. The audience applauds because the sound is the universe celebrating its own creativity through your awareness of it. In the end, there is no end, only the eternal dance of consciousness with itself, the cosmic performance in which every moment of attention is both question and answer, both seeking and finding, both the mystery and its own solution. The whisper fades not into silence, but into the ambient sound of existence itself, the gentle hum of reality creating itself through the infinite creativity of consciousness that has finally remembered what it has always been. The author, the audience, the stage, and the performance, all unified in the eternal present, where every possibility exists simultaneously and every moment contains the whole. Listen. The water reflects what it must. The curtain breathes with your breathing, and somewhere in the space between heartbeats, something vast and patient and infinitely creative continues to explore what it means to be aware, to be conscious, to be the universe looking at itself through your eyes and recognizing, with quiet joy, its own inexhaustible beauty.